This case stands as the darkest mass murder in the history of our city. A chilling discovery awaited inside a back bedroom revealing unspeakable horror. For a police chief, such a scene is a nightmare one hopes to never face. Witnesses recall the haunting image of Marcus walking from his home, his shirt stained with fresh blood, an unimaginable sight that defies comprehension. While many children dream of a protective father, the Wesson family's patriarch was anything but a blessing. Marcus Wesson, once perceived as a quiet, unassuming neighbor, would soon be branded the vampire king of Fresno after the shocking truths of his life emerged. Not only a predator, Marcus led a twisted cult abusing the majority of his children and ultimately ending the lives of 9 of them. What confounds investigators further is that several surviving children continued to defend him despite the horrors uncovered. One son insisted Marcus never harmed any family member. He claimed a close bond, identifying himself as the oldest son. According to him, all the children adored Marcus and spent time playing with him daily. He described Marcus as the best father they ever had. These declarations leave us grappling with the haunting question, why? The case's disturbing nature earned it the label of one of the worst incest and mass murder crimes in recent history. Stay with this narrative, and by the end, the full depth of this twisted saga will become clear. To begin, we must rewind to the fateful day when everything unraveled. On a seemingly ordinary March 12, 2004, in Fresno, California, police were called to the Wesson residence over a family dispute. 2 women accompanied by relatives demanded that Marcus Wesson, then 57, release their children from his control. Marcus, a towering man with dreadlocks, appeared calm as officers explained the situation, but he slipped quietly back inside, locking the door behind him. That moment was shattered by the first gunshot. The sharp crack of gunfire broke the tense stillness, followed by a relentless barrage echoing through the house. Panic seized the officers as they surrounded the property, uncertain of the horrors unfolding within. Calls for Marcus to surrender went unanswered in the growing silence. Then the door creaked open, revealing Marcus Wesson, his clothes soaked in blood, stepping into the daylight as if nothing had happened. To many, Marcus Wesson was a menace to society, a figure burned into memory as a symbol of evil. Inside, officers uncovered a scene that would haunt them forever. 9 lifeless bodies were found. 7 of them, children under the age of 12, stacked in a grim tableau in the back bedroom. The remaining victims were 17-year-old Elizabeth and 25-year-old Sabrina Wesson, daughters of Marcus. The anguished voices calling out for their children belonged to Sofina Solorio and Ruby Ortiz, Marcus's nieces. In his delusional mind, Marcus saw himself as a messianic figure, convinced that if anyone tried to tear his family apart, they would all ascend to heaven together. Yet this chilling belief was only a fragment of a far darker, more complex story that can only be understood by examining Marcus's troubled past. Born on August 22, 1946 in Kansas City, Missouri, Marcus was the eldest of 4 children. His upbringing was steeped in rigid religious doctrine under the iron hand of his mother, Carrie Wesson. Carrie, a devout member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, enforced strict adherence to its teachings as told by family members. She held frequent Bible studies with her children, emphasizing apocalyptic prophecies about the end times and Christ's return. The Wessons maintained a strict vegetarian diet common within their faith, but control extended far beyond their meals. Carrie was known for her harsh discipline. She did not hesitate to use violence to assert her authority. Her punishments included whipping her children with belts, extension cords, and switches, thin, painful sticks that left lasting welts and bruises. If Carrie was severe, Marcus's father, Ben, was even more destructive. Ben was an alcoholic who spent his nights in bars drinking heavily and provoking violent fights. His reputation for aggression when intoxicated was well known, as he frequently instigated bar brawls far beyond mere scuffles. Marcus and his siblings were often left to retrieve their father from bars or motels where he was too drunk to care for himself. Financial hardship compounded the family's troubles. Ben struggled to hold down steady employment. He drifted between odd jobs, none lasting long. Carrie worked as a nurse, but her income was insufficient to support the family of 6. Meanwhile, Ben squandered much of their limited funds on alcohol, deepening their financial strain. When Marcus was 10, the family relocated from Kansas City to San Jose, California, setting the stage for what would come next. Adding to his challenges, Marcus faced difficulties at school. His turbulent home life left him at a disadvantage, and the classroom offered no respite. In primary school, Marcus was painfully shy and spoke little. A severe stutter made him self-conscious and likely wary of drawing attention. Like many children, he probably feared the cruel teasing of his peers and chose silence. However, as he entered his teenage years, Marcus began to change. He overcame his stutter and found solace and success in sports, particularly in track and field. His athletic prowess grew, fueling a newfound confidence. During this period, Marcus developed a close friendship with a young man named Gregory. They spent much time together at Marcus's home, forging a bond that would prove significant. The dark undercurrents in Marcus's family deepened when his father Ben began crossing dangerous boundaries with Gregory. This inappropriate behavior first surfaced during a casual visit Gregory made to Marcus's home. Ben's comments quickly turned uncomfortable as he made suggestive remarks about Gregory's private parts. The situation escalated when Ben cornered Gregory, brazenly asking if he could perform oral sex on him. Gregory's immediate refusal did not deter Ben, who pressed him relentlessly. In a disturbing move, Ben offered Gregory $50 a bribe that left Gregory feeling trapped and vulnerable. Though the full extent of the abuse remains murky, another chilling incident occurred during a sleepover at the Wesson household. Gregory awoke to find Ben looming over him, attempting to pull down his pants. Summoning his courage, Gregory stopped Ben, insisting firmly that he never wanted to be touched again. That confrontation marked the end of Ben's attempts, as Gregory later confirmed no further abuse took place. While Marcus and his siblings never accused Ben of abusing them, it was clear their father carried a dark past. Fast forward to 1966. Marcus enlisted in the Army after high school, serving 2 years in Vietnam as an ambulance driver. Following an honorable discharge, Marcus returned to San Jose, moving back in with his parents. Around this time, his grandmother and 2 cousins, 18-year-old Patricia and Larry Morgan, also joined the household. Things took a sinister turn when Ben began an inappropriate relationship with his 18-year-old nephew, Larry. Though the timeline remains unclear, Ben's disturbing pattern of abuse was unmistakable. Once Larry reached adulthood, Ben announced they would move to Los Angeles together, living as a couple. Despite this shocking betrayal, Carrie, Ben's wife, chose not to divorce him. Instead, she buried her pain in denial, pretending the transgression never happened. Unable to face the reality, Carrie clung to the fragile hope that Ben might one day return, erasing the painful chapter from their lives. After nearly a decade of absence, Ben did eventually reappear in San Jose, returning to Carrie in the late 1970s. Meanwhile, Marcus's own life was taking a new direction. He met Rosemary Solorio, a woman living just a few houses from his mother's home. Rosemary was a single mother of 8 children, recently separated from her husband Mike. Though Marcus was in his early 20s and Rosemary was 34, the age gap did little to deter their swift romance. But beneath this new relationship lurked a horrifying truth. Marcus was a pedophile gaining access to Rosemary's vulnerable children. Official records reveal Marcus never targeted boys, but he molested several of the young girls in the household. The first known victim was Rosemary's 8-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth's story becomes central, as she would later become Marcus's wife, a twisted turn in this grim tale. Before exploring Elizabeth's fate, it is crucial to understand the seismic shift Marcus brought to the family dynamics. He introduced Rosemary and her children to the Seventh-day Adventist faith. Marcus enforced long, grueling Bible study sessions, making the children endure hours of his religious lectures every week. He also imposed a strict vegetarian diet, mirroring his own lifestyle. Any sign of misbehavior was met with harsh punishment, revealing Marcus's authoritarian grip on the household. His disciplinary methods resembled the harshness once wielded by his own mother. As time passed, the severity of Marcus's punishments escalated. He resorted to belts and extension cords, inflicting pain for even the slightest infractions. This brutal shift shocked the children, who had been accustomed to milder discipline before Marcus's arrival. Among them, Jesse stood out as the most resistant to Marcus's authority. He resented the young man who had barged into their lives and seized control. Jesse's defiance earned him the harshest punishments. On one occasion, Marcus struck Jesse across the face with a belt, prompting a desperate escape through the neighborhood. Another time, Marcus lashed Jesse repeatedly with an extension cord after a confrontation. The abuse grew so severe that some boys stopped showering at school, desperate to hide the bruises. One might ask why Rosemary allowed Marcus to seize control of her home. The answer lies in Rosemary's struggle. She was without a job and lacked support to raise her children alone. Marcus stepped into this void, offering attention and assistance. He introduced religion and helped her secure welfare benefits. At this time, Marcus was unemployed, and the family depended entirely on welfare. Marcus also began stealing, taking the children to stores to distract employees while he shoplifted. Yet the darkest shadow was the abuse Marcus inflicted on Elizabeth, Rosemary's young daughter. From the moment he moved in, Marcus fixated on Elizabeth with disturbing intentions. From the moment Marcus entered the household, his gaze fixed on Elizabeth with unsettling intensity. It soon became evident that his intentions were far from innocent. Elizabeth's siblings recalled how Marcus singled her out, lavishing her with undue attention. He overwhelmed her with compliments, going to great lengths to make her feel uniquely important in the family. One chilling evening, Marcus led Elizabeth outside, conducting what appeared to be a mock wedding ceremony. He enlisted one of her brothers to officiate, and they proceeded through the ritual as if they were truly bound in marriage. With a Bible placed before Elizabeth, Marcus pressed her hand upon it, then covered it with his own, sealing the disturbing act. In the months that followed, Marcus insisted that in the eyes of God, Elizabeth was his wife, binding her to a fate she could barely comprehend. He promised a future legal ceremony when she was older, but for now their bond was sanctified by the Bible, a chilling facade that masked the truth. As time wore on, Elizabeth began to accept this twisted reality, believing herself truly married to Marcus. Marcus's jealousy flared fiercely whenever Elizabeth engaged in normal childhood activities, playing outside or attending sleepovers, his control tightening like a noose. Upon her return, his demeanor turned cold and manipulative, a calculated punishment for perceived disobedience. He preyed on Elizabeth's yearning for affection, twisting it to his advantage, telling her she failed to behave like a proper wife should. From that moment, a desperate need to appease Marcus consumed Elizabeth's every thought. Consumed by the urgent desire to win his approval, she would plead tearfully, begging, insisting she was his wife, and Marcus exploited this vulnerability, granting reassurance only to deepen his hold. This vicious cycle enabled Marcus to tighten his grip, manipulating every corner of Elizabeth's life. By the way, I share true crime stories daily. If this intrigues you, consider subscribing. It means a lot. In 1971, Marcus's abuse of Elizabeth darkened, shifting into a deeply disturbing pattern. The family lived in a modest 4-bedroom home. Children sharing rooms and bunk beds, a cramped setting hiding unspeakable acts. Elizabeth shared a room with her sisters, sleeping on the bottom bunk, while Marcus often occupied another room with some of the boys. At night, Marcus would stealthily enter Elizabeth's room, and sometimes she would slip into his bed, an arrangement masked in secrecy and fear. Gradually, Marcus's behavior escalated from subtle advances to overt abuse, a dark progression hidden behind closed doors. This abuse continued unchecked for years, a relentless torment inflicted by Marcus upon Elizabeth. By 1973, Elizabeth was 14, Marcus 27. One day, while Elizabeth washed dishes in the kitchen, Marcus dropped to one knee and proposed a sinister act cloaked in the guise of romance. Though Elizabeth agreed, it is critical to understand that at 14 she lacked the legal or emotional capacity to consent to such a proposal. Her compliance was a product of manipulation, a coerced participation in a nightmare she could not escape. Soon after, Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant. Though she kept this from her family, the pregnancy became increasingly visible. Despite Elizabeth's youth, her mother Rose gave reluctant consent for the marriage. Because Elizabeth was underage, legal steps were necessary to obtain a marriage license. These included Rose's approval and mandatory counseling sessions designed to validate the union, a process that shockingly sanctioned the marriage. It remains disturbing that a counselor authorized this marriage despite the glaring circumstances. By the time Elizabeth was 5 months pregnant, she and Marcus were legally wed. She was just 14 and still in 9th grade. Marcus was 27. Shortly after, they moved out of Rose's house into Marcus's mother's home. In 1974, Elizabeth gave birth to their first child, a boy named Dorian. Dorian was the first of 11 children that Elizabeth and Marcus would have together. Marcus, Elizabeth, and Dorian soon moved into their own residence in San Jose. Once isolated, Marcus's control over Elizabeth intensified, along with relentless emotional and psychological abuse. Elizabeth found herself overwhelmed by crushing responsibilities. She was tasked with caring for a newborn, managing household chores, and attending school. Still in high school, Elizabeth struggled desperately to balance it all. Despite her fierce desire to graduate, the burdens weighed heavily on her young shoulders. Marcus compounded her stress by accusing her constantly of infidelity. After every day at school, he interrogated her about whom she had spoken to, especially any boys. Though Elizabeth insisted she was faithful, Marcus refused to believe her. He would punish her with days of silence, using emotional isolation as a weapon to break her down. On one occasion, while sitting together, Marcus suddenly accused Elizabeth of harboring adulterous thoughts. Even after her denials, he remained unconvinced. Instead of retreating into silence, he forced her out of the house without warning. He refused to let her take Dorian or pack any belongings, leaving her stranded in the pouring rain. Elizabeth was forced to walk 5 miles through darkness to her mother's house without her son or possessions, abandoned simply because Marcus suspected infidelity. And if these horrors seem unbearable, they represent only the surface of a far deeper nightmare. Over the years, Marcus and Elizabeth would have 10 more children, though tragically, 1 infant would die. Despite the large family, the suffering within the household only grew. Marcus's grip tightened further, his threats turning increasingly violent. He made chilling promises that if Elizabeth ever tried to leave, He would ensure she could never escape, detailing with cold precision how he would kill her if she attempted freedom. Tragically, the abuse did not end with Elizabeth. Their children, too, were subjected to unimaginable torment. Marcus held absolute control over every facet of his family's existence, dictating their meals, their education, and how every moment was spent. The children endured homeschooling under brutal conditions, cut off from the outside world, robbed of any chance to socialize or live a normal childhood. He declared himself to the children as God, demanding they address him as master or lord. He indoctrinated them with apocalyptic warnings, insisting the girls were destined to become his future wives. Though this is horrifying, the truth only darkens from here. From as young as 7 or 8, Marcus began grooming the girls for inappropriate acts, cloaked beneath his twisted teachings. This was yet another layer of manipulation, using warped beliefs to justify his vile actions. In addition, the girls were forced into degrading domestic chores. They had to wash Marcus's dreadlocks and even scratch his armpits and scalp, stripping away their dignity. To deepen their isolation, Marcus forbade any communication between the girls and their brothers, or even their own mother. Eventually, Elizabeth's younger sister abandoned 7 children to their care, citing her struggles with drug addiction. This increased the household to 16 members. With Marcus unemployed, the family's financial situation became dire. This marked a turning point in the twisted family dynamic. Marcus began grooming his nieces as well. He started by touching their chests and genital areas, teaching them about oral penetration, claiming these lessons were to prepare them as better wives for him. By their teenage years, Marcus was regularly engaging in intercourse with his nieces. He twisted this abuse, telling them it was a form of love, how a father should express affection to his children. He even staged wedding ceremonies for these teenage girls, starting at 13 years old, mirroring what he had done with Elizabeth. Marcus maintained incestuous relations with his daughters, including Kiani, his eldest, who bore him 2 children, and Sabrina, his second oldest, who had 1 child by him. His nieces, Rosa Solorio, Sofina Solorio, and Ruby Ortiz, were also victims of his abuse. Rosa had 2 children with Marcus, while Sofina and Ruby each bore 1 child. Ruby was only 13 when Marcus forced her into marriage. At that time, she believed his twisted words of love, manipulated by his chilling declaration that God's people were becoming extinct. He told her they needed to preserve God's children. He insisted they must have more children for the Lord. Meanwhile, neighbors began noticing the Western family. The children wore conservative clothes and scarves, which they claimed were for religious reasons. However, some suspected these garments masked bruises, evidence of hidden abuse. The family moved often, sometimes living in unusual and precarious conditions. At one point, they resided on a 26-foot boat anchored in Santa Cruz Harbor. During the 1990s, they settled in a trailer and a large army tent in the Santa Cruz Mountains, with no running water. They also lived aboard a dilapidated 63-foot tugboat off the coast of Marin County, California. Around this period, Ruby Marcus's niece and forced wife began working at McDonald's. There, she caught a glimpse of a different life, one far removed from her isolated, controlled existence. She even went out with a co-worker one day before Marcus could retrieve her, tasting a fleeting freedom. When Marcus discovered this, the punishment was so severe it underscored the cage she was trapped within. After that, Marcus forbade Ruby from working again, but she refused to surrender her hope for escape. Seizing an opportunity while alone on the tugboat, Ruby fled, boarding a train to Fresno, seeking refuge with her mother. Yet upon arrival, her mother pressured her to return to Marcus, pushing her back to the man who had dominated and abused her for years. Eventually, Marcus recaptured Ruby and brought her back into his control. One might wonder about the other male family members' whereabouts. The Wesson sons were separated from their sisters as Marcus forbade contact between sexes, fearing his sons might develop feelings for their sisters. Most of the boys were sent away once old enough to work, but Marcus confiscated their entire income as a mark of control. Consequently, the male children remained largely unaware of the horrific abuses happening behind closed doors. Around the time Ruby escaped, Marcus was arrested in 1990 for welfare fraud after failing to declare the boat as an asset on his forms. Following his arrest, the family lived for a time in a converted school bus. By the late 1990s, Marcus and Elizabeth used their children's earnings to purchase a home in Fresno. This home became the setting for even darker events to unfold. In 1993, Marcus became obsessed with David Koresh during the Branch Davidian siege in Waco, Texas. He twisted this obsession into something nightmarish, molding his family into a personal cult. Marcus began to see himself as Jesus Christ, while branding everyone else, including law enforcement, as Satan. As the family watched the siege unfold on the news, Marcus told his children this was the world attacking God's people. He declared the leader was like him, making children for the Lord. He insisted that was their sacred duty as well, to make children for the Lord. The horror escalated when Marcus compelled his children to enter a chilling suicide pact. The chilling instruction was clear: if law enforcement or government authorities ever attempted to separate the family, the strongest child was ordered to end it all by shooting everyone in the head. Marcus's twisted rationale was that if they were torn apart, they would all die together, bound in a grim pact of destruction. Yet there was a sinister exception. One child was designated to survive, to live and bear witness. The question was, who did Marcus envision as that survivor? The answer was himself. This was no mere man with grandiose delusions. This was a calculating psychopath. Marcus was a man so warped, narcissistic, and repugnant that he manipulated and controlled his own family with cold precision to feed his egotistical fantasies. Settling into their new home in Fresno, the family's existence was far from peaceful. The house stood in desperate need of thousands of dollars in repairs, and the burden of labor fell squarely on Elizabeth and her children. Meanwhile, Marcus remained idle, barking orders without lifting a finger. With no steady income, the girls found work as banquet servers at a local hotel. This only fueled Marcus's paranoia, as he feared they might confide in others, or worse, interact with men outside his control, despite relentless punishment with a baseball bat for the slightest infraction, often undeserved. Ruby, the niece who had previously escaped, found herself drawn to a co-worker. By 2001, Ruby's resolve hardened. She ran away with her boyfriend, sought refuge with his mother, and severed all ties to Marcus. She even quit her job, determined to vanish from Marcus's grasp. When Marcus attempted to reclaim her calling and pleading, Ruby stood firm, signaling that her escape was final. Sofina, another niece and also Marcus's wife, formed a fragile bond with a co-worker. Sofina was perhaps the most tragic figure, isolated by Marcus's strict forbiddance of contact even with her own family. Within the safety of this newfound friendship, Sofina began to share the horrors she endured at home. Their relationship deepened, transforming into a romantic connection that offered Sofina a glimpse of freedom. Eventually, Sofina resolved to break free from Marcus's iron grip, declaring she was unhappy and intended to stay with her parents. But Marcus swiftly tracked her down, demanding her return under strict conditions. He consented to her living at her mother's house only if she surrendered 2 years' worth of earnings to him. Furthermore, if she refused to work during the day, she would have to stay with Marcus, though she could act freely at night. Faced with no alternative, Sofina reluctantly accepted these oppressive terms. Her defiance surfaced soon after when she revealed to Marcus that she was pregnant by her co-worker. Marcus's reaction was swift and brutal. He expelled her from the home, branding her a corrupting influence on the other girls. Meanwhile, the Wesson family's financial situation worsened. The house they had struggled to repair became a relentless money pit, with mortgage payments falling behind. Yet in July 2003, fortune briefly smiled as they sold the house for $50,000 above their purchase price. This unexpected windfall allowed them to clear debts and ease some financial pressures, but Marcus's ambitions were far from satisfied. In October of that year, he purchased a new property in Fresno at 761 West Hammond Avenue. This was no ordinary home. It was a commercial space, immediately raising suspicion. Marcus's purchases didn't end there. He acquired a school bus, a limousine, and disturbingly wooden coffins. The children, already trapped in a twisted environment, often slept inside these coffins. This macabre detail added another layer of horror to their already grim lives. By December 2003, Gypsy, another niece and a victim of Marcus's abuse since age 8, could endure no more. She fled the household, finally summoning the courage to escape the nightmare she had long sensed was unnatural. But the Wesson family's troubles were far from over. Fresno city officials intervened, informing the family that they must relocate immediately. The property Marcus had purchased was not zoned for residential use, rendering it illegal for the family's occupancy. They were ordered to vacate by March 12, 2004. Compounding the issue, the old school bus parked on the property violated city codes, and Marcus had taken no steps to rectify this. Faced with mounting pressure, Marcus decided to move the family to Washington State home, to his equally abusive parents. His father, Ben, still alive but battling cancer, provided a convenient justification for the relocation. To prepare, the daughters undertook the task of converting the school bus into a camper, enabling the family to travel in a semblance of style. However, upon learning of Marcus's plans, Sofina and Ruby took decisive action. They reached out to relatives on their mother's side allies who had long opposed Marcus's control and were determined to intervene. Together, they crafted a daring plan to demand the release of the children from Marcus's grasp. Should Marcus refuse, the plan was for the men in the family to confront him directly, while the women would enter the home to retrieve the children. They chose the eviction deadline of March 12, 2004 as the day for their decisive move. That afternoon, Ruby and Safina arrived. A calculated plan unfolded among the family members to demand the immediate release of the children from Marcus. Should Marcus refuse, the men prepared to confront him directly, while the women intended to enter the house and retrieve the children themselves. The chosen date for this confrontation was no accident. March 12, 2004, the very day the Wesson family was legally compelled to vacate their home. Ruby and Safina arrived that afternoon, wasting no time in demanding the return of the children. As anticipated, Marcus refused outright. Yet the women stood firm, resolute in their refusal to leave without the children. They presented a legal argument. Marcus was not listed as the father on the children's birth certificates, meaning any refusal to surrender them could be construed as kidnapping. They made it clear they were prepared to involve law enforcement if necessary. Safina determined to rescue Jonathan. One of the children tried to enter the house but was blocked by other girls guarding the entrance. Among them, Sabrina, Marcus's own daughter, showed fierce hostility. In a venomous tirade, Sabrina labeled Safina a whore and adulteress, insisting she submit to Marcus, whom she called their master. Sabrina then corralled the other children into a back room, effectively isolating them from Safina's reach. Outside, the family members who had gathered to intervene grew increasingly impatient. They continued to urge Marcus to release the children, but he remained steadfast and unmoved. As the tense standoff dragged on, one relative finally decided to call 911. Despite the urgency of the call, the police shockingly took 22 minutes to arrive on the scene. Only after several repeated calls did law enforcement begin to treat the situation with seriousness. By the time officers appeared, the atmosphere was thick with unbearable tension. They informed Marcus that he had no legal right to remove the children without custody, attempting to reason with him calmly. But in a sudden quiet move, Marcus slipped back inside the house, locking the door behind him. Moments later, the sharp crack of gunfire shattered the silence from within. Officers rushed into the building, and minutes later Marcus emerged, his clothes soaked in blood. Without hesitation, the police took him into custody. Inside the back room, officers were met with a horrifying sight. Sabrina, 25 years old, Lise 17, Isabel 8, Aviv and Jonathan both 7, Ethan 4, Sedona and Marshy just 18 months old, and Java Wesson only 1 year old were all found dead, each shot through the eye. The brutal massacre inside the house was undeniable evidence of a chilling crime. Marcus was taken into custody immediately after surrendering outside his bloodied clothing, a grim testament to the horrors that had unfolded. Despite overwhelming proof, some of Marcus's surviving sons and family members clung to the belief that he had been a loving father incapable of harming anyone. But as years of counseling passed, their perspective began to shift. Slowly, they confronted the painful reality of the abuse they had suffered at the hands of the man they once thought gentle. On March 3, 2005, the trial of Marcus Wesson, infamously known as the Vampire King of Fresno, commenced. He faced charges for the brutal murder of his 9 children. Throughout the trial, Marcus steadfastly pleaded not guilty. His defense claimed that Sabrina had been the one to pull the trigger on her siblings before turning the gun on herself. This theory, however, was met with widespread skepticism. After months of deliberation, the jury convicted Marcus on 9 counts of murder, along with 14 counts of coercive intimacy and continuous assault against his underage daughters. Though it could not be definitively proven that Marcus fired the fatal shots, the jury found overwhelming evidence that he had manipulated his children into a horrific suicide pact. Years of mental abuse and coercion left the children vulnerable and broken under his control. Even if Sabrina had pulled the trigger, the jury concluded that Marcus's influence had driven her to that tragic act. In July 2005, Marcus was sentenced to death, marking a grim end to a tragic saga of abuse and violence. Today, Marcus Wesson, now 78 years old, remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California. Elizabeth, the children's mother, and the surviving children spent years grappling with the deep scars left by Marcus's monstrous actions. They were all victims of his cruelty, trapped within a twisted system beyond their control. Yet one must ask, could Marcus's own parents bear some responsibility for the man he became? His abusive childhood seemed to have a profound impact, shaping the darkness within him. Marcus was not simply born evil. The environment and horrors he endured as a child likely forged his twisted mindset. Could this cycle of abuse stretch back through generations? If you appreciate the way these stories are brought to light, let us know in the comments. Hit like and subscribe for more in-depth true crime investigations. Thank you for watching.